asiyeshindwa. Urithi wa leo ni dhambi zetu zitishazo maisha yetu, tukilitukana jina lake Bwana kwa mienendo na dhambi zetu. Tuliogope dhambi kama ukoma, ndilo jitu linalotutisha. Tuliogope dhambi kama ukoma, ndilo jitu linalotutisha. Ogopa dhambi ndugu, ikimbie, inaua, ina huruma. Tumaini lako weka kwa Yesu, shujaa asiyeshindwa. Ogopa dhambi ndugu, ikimbie, inaua, ina huruma. Tumaini lako weka kwa Yesu, shujaa asiyeshindwa. Ogopa dhambi ndugu, ikimbie, inaua, ina huruma. Tumaini lako weka kwa Yesu, shujaa asiyeshindwa. Ogopa dhambi ndugu, ikimbie, inaua, ina huruma. Tumaini lako weka kwa Yesu, shujaa asiyeshindwa. Ogopa dhambi ndugu, ikimbie, inaua, ina huruma. Tumaini lako weka kwa Yesu, shujaa asiyeshindwa. Ogopa dhambi ndugu, ikimbie, inaua, ina huruma. Tumaini lako weka kwa Yesu, shujaa asiyeshindwa.
Good morning, my brothers and my sisters. I'm grateful for a new morning that our loving God has once again granted us. And as we wake up to a new day, first day of this week, I want to take us through the theories of learning in the special needs education. But before then, I will ask that we may have a word of prayer. Thank you, our gracious Father in heaven, because you are so marvelous, you are good, you are wonderful, our Redeemer. You have been with us, Lord in heaven, through all the stages of this life. You've taken us, Lord in heaven, through the deep dark night of darkness of the night, to a new morning that has never appeared since the creation. We are glad and grateful unto your provisions. God, as we see this day, we want to put ourselves into your hand, that God, you may guide us, that God, you may lead us in all steps to the crowning of the day. And Lord, we pray thee that you will forgive us our trespasses, put us right with you, remind us of thy ordinances, that we may walk with them, Lord, because in them they lead us to righteousness with you. Thank you for listening to our prayer this morning, even as we go through the theories. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as you are aware, we are having the theories that act as the building blocks in the course of the special needs education. And we are going to look at the introduction to SNE, that is 9101, stroke 101, and I want to say categorically that in this area, it has no specified theories to be dealt with. And number two, we are also looking at the curriculum issues in SNE 9101, 103, and equally, it has no specified theories. But when we get to research and rehabilitation, 9101, 104, again, it has no specified theories to be looked at. And finally, in the psychology, 9101, 102, it has theories across the 4 modules. And as you are aware that in psychology 9101 to 102, we are having the modules 002, 003, 005, 011. And now let's look at these theories. And also you are reminded that the theories that in as much as they are missing in the curriculum issues, introduction to SNE, research and rehabilitation, they can be still used in those areas as application questions. And therefore, sorry, a theory is defined as a set of interrelated concepts, assumptions, and generalizations that systematically describes and explains a certain phenomenon. And therefore, a theory attempts to fit relevant facts into a logical explanation and also serve as a framework for collecting more information. So we are going to look at the theories, we are going to look at the theorists behind them and their application in the classroom setup. And actually, we'll also look at the importance of having the theories. And we begin with module number 2, theories of child growth and development and their implications. Now, under this area, we are going to look at the first one. We are going to look at the theories of personality development. So when we are talking about the child growth and development, we are also looking at the unique characteristic traits of a particular child. And under the theories of personality development, we are going to look at psychosocial development by Erik Erikson. We look at the second one, psychoanalytic development by Sigmund Freud. And finally, we also look at the third one on moral development by Jean Piaget and Colbert. So when we look at the psychosocial development by Erik Erikson, we say that personality refers to the way an individual responds to the world or carries himself according to the psychosocial theory. And therefore, personality development, it is a continuous process that begins at birth and continues throughout a person's lifetime until the person gets back to the grave. And therefore, the psychosocial theory argues that an individual's social development is put under specific pressure or conflicts at different ages of life. So Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory of personality development highlights the impact of early experience on later stages of adulthood. And these conflicts are referred to as crises. And thus, at each stage of development, a child faces a new crisis that needs to be resolved at that particular stage of development. Now, the way in which this crisis of each stage is resolved has a major influence on the development of one's overall personality. So according to Erik Erikson, some of the crises that are rising in the life of a child, if they are not solved appropriately, then there comes a time when this crisis will now show up again in the life of this child. For example, think about those children. Remember that as a child is growing, they have the curiosity to know more. But if they are living with the parents who are unwilling to help them unravel and understand, maybe the physical changes that they are having, and the moment the question the child is asking is suppressed, then it is just a matter of time when that crisis will break up again, and it will now show itself most probably in a negative way in the life of this particular child. Therefore, Erik Erikson identified 8 such crises, and he linked them with the 8 stages of psychosocial development. And in these 8 stages, we are going to look at the first 5. So the 8 stages are 1, trust versus mistrust. which is experienced between the ages 0 to 1 year. Autonomy versus shame and doubt, ages 1 to 3 years. There is initiative versus guilt, ages 3 to 6 years. We also have industry versus inferiority, which is 6 to 12 years. And the fifth one, we have identity versus identity diffusion. The sixth one, we are having, of course, the fifth one, identity versus identity diffusion, is 12 to 20 years. And then we're now having the intimacies versus isolation, generatively versus stagnation, and then we have ego, integrity versus despair. So as we are looking at the implications of the psychosocial theory to children with special needs, now you need to know that from the discussion above, the first 5 stages, the influence of the family members and significant others on the growing child's personality is evident. It is seen. And the children with special needs are also likely to experience emotional and behavioral problems if parents, teachers, and peers do the following. So if even the caregivers, if they do the following, number one, they make them feel unwanted. If they make them feel peculiar or incompetent, these children will experience emotional and behavioral problems. If they make them overly criticize, mock, or humiliate them, if they deny them the opportunities to engage in play, social activities, and household chores, if they fail to encourage and train such children to acquire literacy skills of reading and writing, if they fail to train them on expectations of the society in terms of their future adult roles, these children will experience great emotional problems and behavior problems that may become very difficult to combat. And therefore, children with special needs, like all other children, should be assisted by providing them with the necessary knowledge, the skills, the attitudes that will help them to strive for qualities that give them strength. And you need to also remember that care should be taken to ensure that the abilities of the child are always taken into consideration so as to avoid frustrating the child. And this is where we will now come up with even the assessments that are able only to determine and establish what the child is able to do in an educational area. And so you need to remember that we are all unique in the way we develop and the way we react to different situations. And even if you are gifted and talented, then you realize that this group, the way they think, the way they behave is completely different depending with the situations. And then number two, that was psychosocial. Number two, according to Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalytic theory of personality development. And now, according to the Sigmund Freud, the main issues of this theory were two. And the first one was the structure of the mind. And then the second one was the psychosexual stages of development. And therefore, according to Freud, the structure of the mind, Freud's psychoanalytic perspective suggests that there is a structure of the mind that includes the id, the ego, and the superego. So that means the mind, according to him, has been structured into three categories. That is the id, the ego, and the superego. And these structures, they struggle to control they struggle for the control of the energy of the self. And this structure of the mind is functional, not physical. In other words, it refers to the way the brain works. And in most cases, when you follow maybe the id or the ego, you find yourself most likely on the wrong side of even the law. So the id as a structure, the first structure of the mind, according to the Sigmund Freud, It attempts to have a basic pleasure-seeking instinct satisfied. Now, it is the id, that's the part of the brain that does not want to undergo any stimulus that is not friendly, any aversive kind of experience that causes, that inflicts pain, that causes the emotional torture. The id does not want to think about it. It is the self-serving, irrational, impulsive, and totally unconscious. And we are all born with these instincts because they are meant to help us survive. Therefore, as we have said, the id makes sure that the brain is only looking forward to get to the pleasurable activities without the aspect of the pain in the body. And the second one is the ego, which works to prevent the id from expressing itself inappropriately. And this ego is sometimes described as the executive seat. So remember, when we talk about the executive, in this case, it has to work, it works on the principles. The executive works on the principles that are laid down to run the functions of the brain. So the id wants to do something, but the ego reminds the id that there are principles that based on whatever you want to do will not be right at all. And there comes the superego, which is now similar to a conscience, take this job one step further by now attempting to enforce societal, religious, and or parental values about right and wrong. And it therefore acts as a judge or the censor for the thoughts and actions of the ego. And this is now the so-called the moral principle. And you realize that there are two forces in the mind of a human being. When you want to do something, especially if it is something that the society upholds on the wrong, then there is that force that will keep telling you that what you want to do is wrong. So therefore, the superego keeps judging, it keeps judging the ego part of the brain from carrying out its plan. And the ego keeps suppressing the irrational impulses that comes from the id. And at long run, or at long last, we now come to say that a person is a rational human being because of the what? Of the balances that is between the id, the ego, and the superego. And in these psychosexual stages of personality development, according to Freud Sigmund, he says that personality is mostly established by the age of 6. So by the age of 6, the personality of a child is developed. And another Christian writer says that it is between 0 and 6 years that the character and the personality of a child is built, either for eternity or for destruction. And so according to Freud, Sigmund again, he said, early experiences play a fundamental role in the personality development, and it continues to influence behavior later in life. Personality develops through a series of stages during which the pleasure-seeking energies of the id become focused on certain erogenous zones. That is the erogenous zones now means an area capable of producing pleasure. And this psychosexual energy or libido is described as driving force behind the behavior. And each area then serves as the main source of pleasure, frustration, and even self-expression. Therefore, Freud believed that many adult personality traits can be traced to fixation in one or more stages. And therefore, fixation stage or fixation is a persistent focus on an earlier psychosexual stage caused by overindulgence or by frustration. Something that you like doing so much in your childhood may resurface again in your adulthood, and you find yourself again treading back to that direction. And this is now what we call to as the fixation. You like doing it, or because you are frustrated in one way or the other, when you are doing it, you still find comfort into getting back there to find your find your bearing with the situation. So until this conflict is resolved, the individual will remain stuck in this stage for a period of time. And this is why parents are supposed to offer the friendly or friendly attention to the children to help them to overcome the future crises that will arise as a result of their current problems being not solved today. And the psychosexual stages, according to Freud, were divided into the following stage ages. One was the oral stage, according to the Freud, the psychosexual stages. The oral stage that is between between 0 and 1 year, where now the gratification occurs through the mouth. And you can confirm with me that during this age, anything that the child gets is already picked and directed towards the mouth, because the gratification is at the mouth. And then there is the anal stage, which occurs between 1 to 3 years, where the focus of the libido during this stage is on the controlling bowel and the bladder movement. And at this stage, the child may always find herself, the bladder is getting loose, and the child, when it is, the urine, the child just urinate on himself or herself. So the focus again now is on the bladder movement, the bladder and the bowel movement. And then we get to the third one, which is the phallic stage, which is between 3 to 6 years. The primary focus now of the libido is on the genitals. And the child is looking at himself or herself and realizes that they are having something that is unique. So the focus is always on the genitals. And this is why, again, the children are supposed to be taught the importance of what they are having and why it is supposed to be kept in privacy. And then we have the latency as the fourth one, which is between age 6 and 12 years. And in this stage, the libido interests are now suppressed. And the last one is the genital, which is 12 years and above. And now the individuals develops a strong sexual interest in the opposite sex. And at this age, the child may hate the father, especially for the boys. Why? Because they tend to think that the father is taking away the mother from them. You know, that sexual attraction, that opposite sex attraction. And also, at this age, these children becomes attracted to their opposite sex friends. And if there is no care given at this stage, and even guidance and counseling with directionality, then at this age, the child is likely to now become even sexually active, because they also want to find what lies behind and beyond the curtain. And at this age, there are those who may take advantage of them and even molest and defile them. And they may be not willing to, to let it known to their parents, to their caregivers, because they may also find it as a way of gratifying and satisfying their curiosity. And so the stages of the moral development, according to Piaget. Remember, we talked about up there. We have talked about the personality development. We have talked about the personality development, And under it, we have talked about the psychosocial social development. We have also talked about the psychoanalytic development. And now we want to look at the moral development by the two theorists, that is Jean Piaget and his friend by the name Kohlberg. What are now the stages of personality development according to, stages of moral development according to Jean Piaget? Now, moral development again refers to the process by which an individual learns to determine what is right and what is wrong in one's community. The Piaget identified two stages of moral development. Now, some people will say that the communities do not have the written laws, which is very true. But there are community ethics, the handwritten laws that are passed from generation to generation by the word of mouth. And members of the community have always been defending them because they are the mirror unto which the society and the community is built upon. Without them, we are not going to have the communities. And that is why you realize when you go against these social norms, you may be even considered an outcast of a given community. So according to the according to Jean Piaget, the stages of moral development, one was, the first one is morality of realism between ages 5 to 10 years. And then the second one is morality of cooperation between the 10 years of age and above. And in the morality of realism of between 5 to 5 to 10 years, a child who is below age 5 shows little understanding of rules, and that governs social behavior. However, a child between the age of 5 to 10 is aware that rules exist. And again, children in this stage believe that rules are handed down from God, and from parents, or teachers, and that no one can change them. And to such a child, rules are fixed and ought to be obeyed as they are presented in the mind of the child. Therefore, nothing is in itself wrong or right, good or bad. So they are not able to tell whether it is right, whether it is wrong, whether it is good, whether it is bad. And now, when judging a certain action, children at this stage only take into account the consequences of the behavior, and they ignore the intention of the underlying underlying the behavior. Now, before I continue, I want to say categorically that I chose two of my friends. This is Bernard Akifuma and Edwin Ogada, to use them as examples that I want to give down here. Now, there is an example here that when a child hears, and in this case, I'm referring to, I'm going to refer to Akifuma and Ogada. When a child hears that Akifuma has broken 10 glasses while he was assisting a mother in the kitchen, and Ogada has broken only one glass while attempting to steal sweets from the cupboard, then the child will focus on who among the two has broken more glasses. Thus, the younger child will judge Akifuma harshly for breaking 10 glasses as compared to Ogada, who only broke one glass. So when we are talking about the morality of realism, as you have heard, the child has little understanding of the rules. Very little understanding. And so the child will try to weigh. One has broken 10 glasses while assisting the mother, and another one has broken one glass while attempting to steal. So the one who has broken 10 glasses in this case, Akifuma, is judged harshly by the child as compared to Ogada, who broke one glass while attempting to steal. And then the second one, we have the morality. We have the morality of realism, of cooperation rather, which is 10 years of age and above. And at about 10 to 11 years of age, children's moral development undergoes more change. This is due to the child's exposure to various social situations, the environment, and also an understanding that rules are made for the purpose of protecting rights of individuals begins to emerge. The child begins to understand that rules are there to protect the rights of individuals, and the child now realizes that right or wrong does not only depend on an individual's opinion, but it depends on the society, the societal views of the things or the perspective or the circumstances within the jurisdictions. And with this understanding, the children now learn that rules are flexible and may be subjected to change. And like the child of age 5 to 10 years, the older child is now able to make judgments based on the motive underlying the behavior that has been observed. And now, in this case, from the example that we had above there, in the example on this, the incident of breaking of glasses, a child beyond 10 years now is likely to focus on the motive. Consequently, Ogada, who only broke one glass, will be judged harshly as her motive was stealing. And this is now in the morality of cooperation, where now the child begins to understand the in-depth of the law as a way of protecting the rights and as a way of making sure that everyone is protected from the negative effects that may arise from some of the members of the community or the society. Then we have the stages of moral development. Remember, stages of moral development according to this Jean Piaget were morality of realism 5 to 10 years and morality of cooperation 10 years and above. But remember, at that area, we talked about morality development by two theorists, Jean Piaget and Kohlberg. So what are the stages of moral development according to Kohlberg? Now, the Kohlberg's theory of moral development is dependent on thinking of Jean Piaget. Remember, Kohlberg was a student of Jean Piaget. So his theory is dependent on his master. So he demonstrated through studies that people progressed in their moral reasoning through a series of stages. And now he stipulates the 60 stages, which are now generally classified into 3 levels. And these 3 levels are pre-conventional, the pre-conventional level. We have in the pre-conventional level, this is where we talk about obedience and punishment, individualism, instrumentalism, and even exchange. So the pre-conventional, where you have to be obedient, and if you can't obey, then there is the punishment aspect. Then there is the conventional, where somebody, what somebody has done which is good is exchange the praises, good boy, good girl. And in this area, we are now keeping law and order. If we fail, then we know that there are consequences attached to the failure. We also have the post-conventional, which is a social contract where the conscience is controlled by the principles, the ethics of the society. That ever exists. Even if the laws are not written, then at the back of the mind, somebody will have to know that what I want to do may be in the objection side or in the objection view of the society. So the morality may be learned through some of the following ways. If you want the child to learn on the moral aspect, what are you supposed to do? You can make the child to learn on the morality by rewarding and punishing. So when the children receive praise and approval for their behavior, they are likely to engage in such behaviors even in future. However, if their behavior is not good, then it meets the reprimand. So from the parents and even significant others, and the undesirable behavior may not be repeated again. It is very unfortunate that today my child remains to be my child. But some years ago, you remember that the children belong to the society, and regardless of whose child you are, when you are found on the wrong side of the law, then any parent or any adult who come across you will demonstrate to you that what you did was very wrong. And equally, when you go home crying, your parent will also be on your neck. So it will be a double tragedy. It was better another person's parent finishes with you, and you cry, and you go home as if nothing has happened. And number two, imitation of the role models. Children, if exposed to parents and teachers who are of good morals, may emulate those moral behaviors. It is very unfortunate that in the society we are having poor role models. It was even unfortunate. You remember the other time that some unlearned friends in the National Assembly wanted to lower the age of becoming a wife and a husband to 16. Quite unfortunate. So what are some of the basic morals that children should acquire? Remember, the child should acquire honesty. He should acquire respect for other people's views or ideas. And this is where we now talk about tolerance. If in a classroom, the others are giving their views over a subject, they are not supposed to be viewed down. They are not supposed to be discouraged, because we are talking about the society or the classroom tolerance. Again, children should learn respect for other people's property. This will this will help to do away with the cases of theft, stealing, and even the corruption in the near future to come. Look at what is happening today. We are having the new curriculum thinking that we are now going to do away with the corruption cases. What has happened will happen again. The children should also have self-discipline and even sensitivity to other people's needs. They also need to be patient and tolerant to others. So according to Kohlberg, these are the basics that a child should require in order to live in an ever-changing society, in a loving relationship with others that is not based on material possession, that is not based on you must give me something for me to do something. Those ones were the theories in module 002. Remember, we have talked about the Kohlberg, we have talked about the Jean Piaget in the moral development. In the personality development, we talked about the Sigmund Freud. Now, let's look at the module 003, that is guidance and counseling. So the theories of guidance and counseling. And here we are going to look at the psychoanalytic theory. We'll also look at behavioral theory. We look at the cognitive behavioral theory, and then we look at the client-centered theory or the person-centered theory. So according to the psychoanalytic theory, it has the assumptions where the theory suggests that behavior is motivated by unconscious or subconscious and conscious feelings, thoughts, and motives. And they say that behavior is deterministic. So they are underlying facts or motives that can make a behavior to show out. And what are the goals of the psychoanalytic theory? The goal of this theory in counseling is to reduce overdependence on defense mechanism. Remember, we talked about the defense mechanism where the child begins to look at, now I have been found red-handed, I've been found outside, what must I do to save myself? So you are trying to, in this theory, the goal is to now reduce the overdependence on defense mechanism, take demands, and bringing unconscious information, experiences to conscious, and allowing one gain insight into his or her behavior. And the key concepts in this theory are based on the following: the structure of personality, the conscious and the unconscious mind, defense mechanism and stages of development. What does the structure of personality has to do with the psychoanalytic theory? Remember that the structure of personality refers to the unique patterns of psychological and physical processes which control your behavior and thoughts and make you distinctly you. That which makes you to be yourself. And you cannot be me, and I cannot be you. That is what we now refer to as the structure of personality. And in the structure of personality, the theory interplays between the id, the ego, and the superego, which we had talked about under the theories of personality development up there, where we talk about the id, and in this case, this is now the biological component of the structure of the personality. And we said it is always irrational. It wants to satisfy, itself. It looks for pleasurable activities and moments and circumstances. It is always impulsive. It works on pleasure principle of avoiding and pain and seeking pleasure. It is also primitive and remains undeveloped. It seeks immediate gratification. And for example, a child who farts in class and laughs because it is fun, or a pupil who yawn loudly in class 8, because they felt like it is right. And then we talk about the ego, which is now the psychological component of the human personality. It is realistic and it is conscious. It develops as growth takes place. And now the ego tries to balance the excessive impulse of the id and the superego. For example, when a pupil pressed to pass urine, the child waits until they reach to the toilet, instead of now urinating on the self. And remember, when we were talking about the personality development up there, we realized that there's a circumstance when the child may find himself or herself urinating on the self. Why? Because we realized that there is that age the child is trying to struggle with the control of the bladder and even the bowels. And the superego, now we say, is the judiciary. It is the lawmaker. It plays the major development roles in self-concept. How do you view yourself? The self-image, your self-confidence, and even how you esteem yourself. That is your self-esteem. It also develops in the operating the principles, the self-governing rules, e.g. a pupil who makes personal timetable and follows it to the letter, regardless of who it interferes with. And we also talk about the unconscious and the subconscious mind, where we say that now the consciousness is the act of or processing of being aware, the process of being aware, particularly of one's surrounding thoughts and bodily condition. It refers to being alert and understanding your immediate environment. Unconscious, hence, is used to refer to processes which are outside or blocked from our present mind. Something that you don't even think about becomes the unconscious. But when we talk about the conscious, that which you think about within the environment or that which surrounds your body condition. So the unconscious motivates the action or the manner in which a client will present their situation. But as the counselor, you have to try to reach the underlying issue. And many problems are as a result of mental processes which are hidden to the client. Now, the hidden processes include the experiences, the experiences, wishes, and impulses which were either denied, and you remember we talked about this, they may have been they were either denied or they were ignored some time back. But hence, they became repressed. But now, they are now, aggressively rising up again. They want to, they have germinated, they are growing, and they want to show out that they are there. So if the repressed information is brought to the conscious, faced, and explored, then some of the client's issues will be accepted. They will be owned and they will be resolved. Remember those years when people used to go for the night dances. I am made to understand that there are those who suppress their feelings, and at long last, these feelings emerge up again, and now, even at the age of adulthood, they have now to go for the disco matangas because they were suppressed when there was willingness to go for the same. The psychosexual stages of development, as we talked about them up there, were oral period, where the gratification is at the mouth. We talked about the anal period. We talked about the phallic period. We talk about the latency period, and then we also talk about now the genital period. And these stages focus on the child experiences, considering how the child grow into sexual maturation. People are born from childhood with the active sexual organs, and how you mature sexually matters a lot. Where you do not become, a reckless, careless human being with how you handle yourself. If you are a young person, you just throw yourself into the hands of the opposite sex, just like a ball which is being tossed to and fro over the net of the volleyball. Now, from birth to 12 years, the child goes through the 5 stages named above. And if one of these stages were ignored, or if they had an ugly experience that was repressed, not discussed, ignored, then it leaves an impact on the child's brain and is bound to cause problems in life with the knowledge of the child. You remember when they were very active with their genitals, like we talk about the genital period, and the child is very active with their genitals. They want to explore, they want to know more about it, they want to find out why. Is it that around my genital there is the hair that is growing there? And bring this to the attention of the parent, who in turn punishes the child and says, you have bad behavior. Because that was repressed, it will aggressively come up again at such a time when you least expect. By that time, most likely, you will be all adults and you cannot control this in a child. Behavioral theories. We have the behavioral theories, and according to the behaviorists, they have assumptions that behavior can be learned, it can be relearned, it can also be unlearned. So this means the behaviors can either be good or bad. And that means they look at a person potentially to be good or bad. And they say that all people are born good. And again, they believe that behavior can be modified. And therefore, a person with an acceptable behavior can learn acceptable what? Acceptable behavior. And the goal of the behavioral theories is to initiate and strengthen adaptive behaviors. Those behaviors that are good, that can be picked, that can be used as an example for others to emulate. That means we must be having good role models to be emulated, so that we weaken the bad behavior or the maladaptive behaviors and even reduce the fears and the anxieties. And the key concept of these theories are that a person is the producer and the product of his or her environment, and he or she has more options for responding to certain behavior if equipped with appropriate skills. And we are going to look at these behavioral theories, and each behavioral theory is having the therapeutic aspect. And the therapeutic, that is now how best can we combat these behavioral theories in a way that does not interfere with the individual to the negative. So a counselor using the behavioral theory works towards having the client controlling preceding events of that behavior, controlling that behavior from appearing again, and also reinforcing acceptable behavior using a role model and even mentors. Unfortunately, in our environments, in our country today, we are having people who are poor role models, including leaders, who wants to be in highly esteemed positions, but with crooked kind of characters that cannot be emulated. And if emulated, will lead us and will lead our children to even to the deepest end, where we can never be referred or recognized as human beings anymore. Again, forming mental teaching, learning through systematic desensitization, and also through cognitive, learning through systematic desensitization. And then that was on the behavioral, and then that was on the behavioral theory. We also have the cognitive behavioral theory, which is based on the assumption is that the cognitive behavior theory is based on the view that human beings are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of things or the world around them. You know, the belief that learning results from the reorganization of perceptions and formation of new relationships. And the key concept in this theory are that everybody has inner potential for rational and irrational thinking. And one has choices for self-actualization or self-destruction. So you have to choose for yourself. And people are self-talking, self-evaluating, and even self-sustaining. It is very easy for one to know when he or she is engaged in something wrong. And this theory looks forward. The goal of this theory is to help the client to overcome the emotional blocks and even disturbances, so that they come fully functioning and to change from rigid and demanding thinking to preferential and acceptable thinking. And therefore, clients are taught to analyze their reality and get rid of distortions. And when this is done, then there is anticipated reduction or elimination of the undesirable emotions. And this and the therapeutic part of this theory is that the technique that is used in this theory is that the counselor identifies the client's beliefs of a generalization and disputes what sounds illogical, that which does not sound to be part of what is supposed to be done. And again, the homework is given to the client to go and practice the new skills that has been learned, that has been taught during the guidance and counseling session, e.g. assertiveness. And the technique takes for granted that the counselor is more knowledgeable than the client. Hence, she already becomes the teacher of the logical. And then we talk about the client-centered approach, which has also its own assumption. The client-centered approach has assumption that people are basically good. They are always striving towards self-actualization. And again, the approach dwells mostly on the counselor on the individual's feelings rather. And the approach consists of ways in which individuals perceive and define themselves. And the goal of this theory, counseling, is to provide a greater degree of independence and integration of the individual. And therefore, you as a counselor, you have to seek to assist the clients in their growth process, enabling them to cope better with the problems they are facing now or in future. And the clients are also helped to remove pretenses and increase trust in their self-worth. You know, somebody may be pretending that they may not have fear over towards something, yet that is their greatest weakness. The counselor becomes a mirror, and the counselor becomes a mirror to the client. Becomes a mirror for clients to watch or listen to themselves. And we also need to show appreciation for individual learner in our class, to know learners' potentials and help them develop them as we show unconditional positive regard for learners under our care. It is very unfortunate that some teachers have become so inhuman with their dealings with these learners. At home, the learners, the children may be having parents who are not accommodating. You know, at home they may be abused. They may be told some unkind words, good for nothing. But again, when the child comes to school, the teacher, who is supposed to be taken as a role model, to bring this child to be at par with the rest, also tells the child that the child is good for nothing. And as a result, the child confirms that if my parent says I'm good for nothing, indeed, I am good for nothing because the teacher even says so. What are the techniques that are used in client-centered theory? Remember, we have said that client-centered theory, it has the assumption that people are generally good. So the techniques here, it emphasizes on the quality interpersonal relationships, where the clients are encouraged to forge more meaningful relationships, especially with persons of like minds, people who share the same dreams and ideas with them. They should forge, good relationship with these people, providing clients with attitudinal conditions of genuine empathy, where a client is not judged or is not shown the signs of disbelief. And each client is listened to as an individual and not likened to previous clients. And this is what should take place even with the teachers. When you're dealing with the learners, you should not show them your disbelief towards them in what they are not able to do. Kindly encourage them and allow them to try to explicitly explore and exhaust their potentials. In doing so, yes, they may not be the best, but I can assure you, they are going to realize that which they may not have realized if you have showed them the discipline. And then it also works on the technique of unconditional positive regard, where the client is appreciated, trusted, and treated as a valued being. So that marks the end. That marks the end of module 003, Theories of Guidance and Counseling. What about 005, Introduction to Educational Psychology? It is one of the heaviest, and so I will request us to take a break of 2 minutes, and then we continue. Thank you for that. Our 2 minutes are over. So we are looking at introduction to educational psychology, and we are looking at the theories that are related with the psychology. Now, before we look at that, I want us to look at the functions of a theory. And we are saying that a theory provides the basis for organizing our thinking about the variables that are important in understanding behaviors. Theory also assists us in building concepts of behavior and performances. It helps us in predicting, in understanding, and even identifying behavior problems in education setting. The theories enable us examine the linkage between variables or concepts. They stimulate research and enhance an increase in knowledge. And also the theories help us understand and interpret the human behavior. And finally, it also helps us have the models to work from in our approach to implementing concepts and information that we acquire from research. And now we are going to look at the theories and we are going to look at the psychological. We are going to look at the psychological theories, and the psychological theories, there are 4 that we are going to look at. And one, again, we are going to look at behavioral theories. And under behavioral theories, we are going to study the work of three theorists. That is Ivan Pavlov, J.B. Watson, therefore J.B. Watson, Bruce Frederick Skinner, and Albert Bandura. We also look at the social learning theory by Albert Bandura. We look at the humanistic theories by Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, information processing theory, or the so-called cognitive theory. Finally, we'll also look at the other theories that maybe are not in the ones that we are beginning to look at just right now. So in behavioral theories, we shall look at the main behavioral theories, which are 2. And one, we are going to look at the so-called classical conditioning theory. We also look at the operant conditioning theory. And in the classical conditioning theory, we look at the work of the Ivan Pavlov and J.B. Watson. And in the operant conditioning theory, we look at B.F. Skinner. So in the classical conditioning theory, you are aware of the fact that many of us usually begin to salivate at the smell of a favorite dish before presentation. I remember being a chief chef, when I'm preparing a delicious meal, I do not like to keep my colleagues in the kitchen. They have to remain far away from the kitchen so that they are totally terrorized by the flavor or the smell of the favorite dish that I'm making. And so, leave alone having it in the mouth. In schools, remember we are looking at the classical conditioning theory, and we are not supposed to forget that we are becoming educational experts. It is in the view of the education that we are looking at this one. So in schools, also, learners and their teachers They often respond to change of lessons with the ringing of bells, of course, without anyone telling them that you now need to change and go to the next subject or another activity area. But they keep changing by just hearing the bell. So we are also able to respond appropriately on certain ways to smell of our favorite food or to school bells because we have been classically conditioned to do so. Look at it when it's about to rain. The moment the showers begin to fall, you run to the house without being told, please come to the house. Why? Because you are being classically conditioned that there are some of the experiences in the environment that will make you to respond immediately. So it is a form of learning in which a neutral stimulus that usually has no effect on a learner comes to elicit, come to bring a response of some sort by virtue of its association. So because we have associated ourselves so much, with the bell, when we hear it ring, we automatically know that it is time to change to another subject. And as if that is not enough, Pavlov discovered that this kind of association, while studying the digestive system of the process of dogs, he observed that by his dogs, that his dogs will salivate at the appearance of a caretaker who just comes to feed them. And even when the caretaker is not having food, they just begin to salivate. Why? Because of the association. The dogs have associated so much with the caretaker to an extent that at just the merest appearance of the caretaker, they know the food is coming. So he then speculated the dogs. He speculated that the dogs probably associated the caretaker, which is initially a neutral stimulus, with food, which is a natural stimulus that ordinarily evokes the response of salivation. So what did he do? He designed a simple experiment that he will first of all ring the bell, then present the meat powder to the dogs. So he did this continuously by pairing the meat with the bell. So when he eventually removed the meat, he will ring the bell. Remember, we are talking about classical conditioning. He will ring the bell without the presence of the meat, but the dogs will still salivate. He had conditioned them by continuously pairing them. But again, you also need to know that even after you have paired them, eventually, when the association will keep deteriorating down the line, where you have now removed the meat completely, but you keep ringing the bell, then the association will be more useless than as it was because of the lack of the pairing. So you ring the bell, you present the food, then they don't know that the bell is an indication that the food is coming. So eventually, when you remove the food and you keep ringing, the ringing eventually down the line will also lose its meaning because of the lack of the pairing and the association as according to the classical conditioning by the Pavlov and even the Watson. So what are the implications of classical conditioning? Just like Pavlov conditioned his dogs to salivate at a neutral stimuli. Remember, it is a neutral stimuli. You ring the bell is not food. You ring the bell, which is a neutral stimuli, to make them salivate to a natural stimuli, which is the food now. So just like, Pavlov conditioned his dogs to salivate at neutral stimuli, children also learn many things through classical conditioning. And two most commonly cited things learned by children through association of conditions are attitude and emotional reaction. So I want us to talk about the attitude. Most attitudes and prejudices are acquired through classical conditioning. Just check on the attitudes you have towards certain events or people and try to reflect on how you acquired them. School children may also acquire certain attitudes through classical conditioning. For example, a learner may acquire negative attitude towards mathematics because of how he or she associates it with the unpleasant experience of gaining or being made to recite the mathematics table, the mathematical tables allowed in class. So the recitation of mathematical table in most learners elicits anxiety, the fear of unknown. So a learner who is conditioned to view mathematics negatively may perform even poorer in that subject. And this will further lead to discouragement. So as a teacher of different subjects, remember when we are talking about behavior modeling, we are talking about creation of humor within the classroom or within the lesson. How do you make your lessons lovely, enjoyable, captivating, and friendly that the children that you are teaching will not only love you, but they will love the lesson that you are teaching. And this will now bring the performance. Then we talk about the emotional reaction. We also talk about the emotional reaction, where most emotions, this is according to J.B. Watson, where most emotional reactions are also learned through classical conditioning. A knowledge of emotional reactions and classical conditioning came from conditioning. And J.B. Watson insisted that he instilled the fear of a white rabbit in an 11-month-old boy called Albert, who originally had such fear. When he sees the rabbit, the fear comes in. So the conditioning of fear in Albert was done by pairing a loud noise, which usually elicits fear reaction in children, with a white rabbit, which is a neutral stimulus to Albert. So Albert was eventually conditioned to fear the rabbit through subsequent pairing. Now, even though Watson never helped Albert to unlearn the fear of the white rabbit, he later demonstrated that such fears can be unlearned by the process of extinction. So in this case, by presenting the rabbit alone without pairing it with the noise. So how was conditioning of fear done? So in this respect, many fears or phobias and other undesirable reactions or to emotions portrayed by learners can be weakened, or they can be eliminated through extinction. We talk about the counter conditioning, where now a phobia or undesirable response is reached to by replacing it with a new idea or a new way of dealing with things, such that the fear is removed. And in the classroom setting, we can apply the conditioning in teaching by creating a positive classroom environment to the student to overcome the anxiety or the fear. We can also pair an anxiety-provoking situation, such as performing in front of a group, with a pleasant surrounding helps the student learn new associations. Even if they're performing in front of others, we are able to pair this performance by even appreciating, applauding them, and even giving the rewards to make them love what is taking place. So we also talk about the operant conditioning. This is now the work of the B.F. Skinner, as was noted earlier. Remember that Skinner believed that behavior can be determined by identifiable causes, and that these causes can be shaped through operant conditioning. And in this regard, he did an experiment with some animals in the process of association. So in this process, the animal that he uses here was a rat. So there was a box, and there was the pellet, and so he tries to associate the stimuli with the consequences of response. So he uses a box which has since been known as Skinner box, where a rat presses a bar, and whenever the rat presses the bar, the food pellet will fall, will drop in a food tray. So the B.F. Skinner focused more on the relationship between the behavior and the consequences, and the law of effect takes precedence when one considers the relationship between behavior and its consequences. And also the individual's response behavior is met with pleasurable consequence. That is, the individual is the individual is likely to repeat a similar behavior. If a behavior is not reinforced continuously, then the behavior will go into extinction, where now the extinction in this case in this case refers to the gradual weakening and disappearance of a learned response when it is no longer enforced. And an example, because many children engage in certain behavior just to get attention, such attention-seeking behavior like temper tantrum, they can be extinguished by consistently withdrawing our attention whenever the behavior occurs. So you can again extinguish undesirable behavior this way. So according to the Skinner, there are 3 consequences that will affect the repeat of any behavior. And maybe we talk about the 2. And the one here is reinforcement, and the second one is punishment. What are the characteristics of reinforcement? Remember, when you are reinforcing, when you are reinforcing a behavior, you must make sure that the reinforcer is an age appropriate. It should match the age. The reinforcer should serve the purpose, should be individualized, where you are not going to generalize the learners. It should be immediately given following the behavior to be reinforced, and it should also be consistently applied. Now, what is the classroom application? What is the classroom application of behavioral theories? One, positive reinforcement is used to increase likelihood likelihood of a desirable behavior. And number 2, you can scale out maladaptive behavior by punishment. The bad behavior is met with a reprimand. And 3, ignoring the bad behavior so as to undergo extinction. The planned ignoring. And then praising the child. Number 4, praising the child whenever the desired behavior is exhibited, to encourage them to keep exhibiting that good behavior. And number 5, in ensuring immediacy of the consequences of a behavior. If the behavior is supposed to be met with a reprimand, then the reprimand follows the behavior immediately it is exhibited. If the behavior is supposed to be followed with a positive reinforcer or a reward, then it is supposed to be done immediately, so that others can also see why it is important to exhibit a good behavior. So that was on the behavioral theories. The second one is social learning by Albert Bandura. And remember that this was American psychologist, and in the social learning, he says that social learning does not wholly agree with the fact that all behavior is learned through conditioning, as you have just seen, according to the operant conditioning and even also the classical conditioning. So Bandura believed that an individual has the ability to, one, to select and control his own behavior by imitating other people, such as parents, teachers, and peers. So you can still see, even in social learning, the role modeling is very important, and a child can also observe his or her peers and copy the desirable or undesirable behaviors. And you must have seen children of the same age at some point in time, especially at the age of adolescence. They try to to speak almost the same way, the tonal variation, the dressing style, since the observation and modeling play a major role in social learning, and it is sometimes referred to as observational learning or modeling. And so, the person whose behavior is observed and modeled is usually referred to as a model, and this type of learning is known as vicarious learning because it takes place by the learner simply watching someone else carrying out the skill to be learned, and then the learners will now follow that. And so the reinforcement is indirect or vicarious. And then he talked about the phases of observational learning. There is a role model, and now you are going to observe the role model's behavior, and then you now imitate that. So according to Albert Bandura, in the social learning, he talks about the three phases of observational learning. First phases of observational learning, and one, attention, where now you attend to the material behavior to be observed, and then the retention, now the storage of the behavior in the form of mental images, and then the reproduction of the observed behavior using the stored mental images for representation, and finally, motivational, where the acquired behavior is enacted if reinforced to do so. So we have attention, we have retention, reproduction, and we also have the so-called motivation. We also talked about the limitations of social learning theory. One, it does not take into account the role of heredity in shaping the behavior of a child. And also, it does not consider the underlying problems that lead a child into engaging into undesirable behavior. And remember that the undesirable behavior can be learned, can be acquired through learning, social learning, by observing the behavior of the peers, the role models which are poor. Then observational learning cannot be used to eliminate all undesirable behaviors. And in the classroom application, the classroom application of social learning theory is that you need to incorporate experiments, you need to incorporate demonstrations, experiments, practicals, and also hands-on in teaching, so that learners can observe and learn. You also have to provide opportunity within the classroom for modeling. And now you should note that you as the first and foremost model, you are taken as an example. And the learners will use you to justify even their actions. And you also need to always portray positive attitude when presenting the subject content, however difficult it may be. When you show the negative attitude towards what you are teaching to your learners, then they get it to the negative, and this will affect them in their learning. And as a result, as a teacher, you will realize that you have done more harm to this particular individual child than good. And then you also can apply the social learning by handling behavioral problems in class in ways that do not negatively impact on the learners who are watching. For example, if you may not only be hated by the learners, you are administering corporal punishment too, but also by the rest of the learners watching the scene. When you are administering a corporal punishment to a given learner, it is not supposed to be done in the presence of others if it has to, because those who are watching the scene will also hate you more than you are hated by others. And finally, just a minute. Let's carry on. So, as I was saying, handle behavior problems in class in a way that does not impact the learners who are watching. Then finally, display such qualities like respect, good listening habits, and positive regards to learners with special needs. Even if they are children, since other learners will be emulating you. Remember that if you as the teacher exhibit negative social behavior, it will induce the same qualities in learners, and they will also end up hating their colleagues who are having the special needs within the classroom. And so we have talked about number one, the behavioral theories, number two, social learning theories, and number three, humanistic theories by Abraham Maslow and his friend Carl Rogers. Humanistic theories are a group of theories that believe that behavior is determined by one's internal private world or by one's personal perception of reality. Now, accordingly, one's behavior is controlled by external factors such as reinforcement of models, but by also internal factors. Now, for example, a learner who works hard to excel in mathematics may be seen to be driven forth by motivating internal factors such as the need to become an accountant. And similarly, a learner who studies widely may be driven by the internal need to become the best student possible. And this theory has implications on a teacher or to a teacher. That is, if you want to be successful in instructing learners, teachers need to listen to this very well, that if you want to be successful in instructing learners, it is important that you have a closer understanding of the unique views of reality and driving force behind their behavior. If you have such understanding, you may guide, such an understanding may guide you in organizing the learning environment and activities in such a way as to propel them towards their goal. And the two leading humanistic theories, the Abraham Maslow, that is the theory of motivation, and the Carl Rogers, person-centered education and counseling. And we are going to begin looking at Abraham Maslow, the theory of motivation. Where Maslow is, remember that this is a renowned humanistic theorist, and his theory has been useful in helping us understand the human motivation or the desire to perform or learn. And for that reason, his theory is known as the theory of motivation. Now remember that one aspect of this theory states that within us are both forces that seek growth and those that resist growth. So the force that seeks growth impels us forward towards full functioning of all our capacities and wholeness. While the forces within us that resist growth take us to cling to safety, to cling to the past records that try to discourage us from realizing and reaching our self-actualization stages that we tend to have reached. There are many people who have fought beyond their past mistakes, their past experiences, and finally they have decided to research their negative thoughts so that they can reach the self-actualization stage. And when we talk about self-actualization stage, according to Abraham Maslow, it says that nearly 1% of the people, nearly less than 1% of the total population of a given country or even the world reaches that stage. And it talks of very few people who have reached that stage, like the likes of Nelson Mandela, the likes of Mother Teresa, Wangari Maathai, and even in Kenya today, we speak about some few people like Francis Atwoli. So you are likely to think of investing in a house when you cannot afford food. So remember, according to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we are having the pyramid. We are having the pyramid down here. According to Abraham's pyramid of hierarchy of needs, remember that the triangle is wider, or the pyramid is broader at the bottom, and it tapers towards the top. And this is an indication that the needs at the bottom of the pyramid are basic to everybody, and while only a few strive to reach the upper ones. So the lower needs must be satisfied before one can strive for the higher ones. So it talks about the physiological needs, where we have the food, the water, the good health. You talk about the safety needs, where we have the shelter. It talks about the love of the belonging needs, the self-esteem, and even the self-actualization. And that means that his theory, the Abraham's Maslow theory, has also the implications on a child. That means a child may not develop the motivation to learn and move towards personal growth unless deficiency needs are met. For example, the desire to learn may not be a priority to a hungry child. The priority in this case will, of course, how can I satisfy my stomach? So when you come across intelligent learners who do not do their homework or seem to be disinterested in classwork activities, or they appear to be restless most of the time without any obvious cause, it will be important for you as a teacher or as a caregiver in the education institution to investigate the cause of such a behavior. Why? The children may portray such behavior perhaps because they come to school hungry, they may lack sufficient sleep, or they may be burdened with problems of insecurity, family problems, anxiety or fears. They come from, where the child-headed homes, they may be child parents. So what are the implications of this theory? The classroom implications that they have medical health problems. These children may have medical health problems, hence they may need good diet, rest, care, and even medication. The disability imposes a number of limitations in the lives of these learners, so they may need a safe and stable environment that spells out physical, social, and mental security. They may also live with uncertainties, hence the assurance of love and sense of belongingness is important from the side of a teacher. Now, what could be some of the reasons why we may be working, but we cannot reach the topmost part of the pyramid of Abraham's Maslow? That is, we may not reach the self-actualization. Remember that self-actualization, now according to Carl Rogers, he says, he gives reasons why now people cannot self-actualize. One, Carl Rogers came up with two developmental concepts of self, and this is number one, the real self and the ideal self. Remember, in the real self, this is a person's perception of self, where you look at yourself, your self-concept, your self-image, your original feelings, your thoughts and experiences, that some of them may be negative even towards yourself and even discouraging. And also the ideal self. This is now a person's image of what you would like to be or what you think should be. So according to Rogers, the self has the capacity to grow and actualize, but it does not sometimes do so. This is because of social interference and commands from the external world. Carl Rogers gives two main reasons that explain why people sometimes do not reach the self-actualization. And these are, number one, incongruence or lack of compatibility between the real and ideal self. And the person, in the person-centered education and counseling, according to Carl Rogers, he says that this theory remember, it was developed by Rogers, and according to Rogers, the individual has his own unique point of view that is personal. And this means that the way you see the world, the way there is the real self, the ideal self, may be totally different from how other people see it. For example, you may have two people watching a football game, between Gor Mahia and Sofapaka. And at the end of the game, they may come out with different impressions of such things as who fouled who, which team was favored by the referee, and the reasons why one team won the game and not the other. And such personal views sometimes brings differences even in the families. And according to Rogers, every person from birth has his own unique experiences with the references to the following aspects. Number one, thoughts. We have different thoughts. 2, feelings. 3, sensations. 4, perceptions, and 5, memories. And all these experiences are things going on within a person at any one given moment, and they originate from within. They also originate from within the person. So, what are useful developments in this theory according to Carl Rogers? What are his views? He says that now it is based on the views of the uniqueness of a learner that Carl Rogers came up with the following developments in education. Number 1, person-centered education, and 2, learning principles. Where in the person-centered education, he emphasizes the need of the following. Number 1, teachers to focus on the learner's individual feelings, the attitudes and values in their teaching. That means the teachers need to be responsive to the learner's feelings during learning. Please, teachers, listen to these learners. Try to get to their world of thoughts and get to the depth of their lives so that you can unearth what is hidden that is eating them internally, that when they think about, then they may not find it very easy even to get accommodation in the learning environment. Again, teachers, you need to, the need for high quality of interaction between the teacher, between the student in the classroom, where the teacher is expected to be real, to be genuine, to be empathetic, and even trustworthy. And also, finally, the need for teachers to play the role of a facilitator and leave the learners to choose what and how they want to learn because of their uniqueness. We are living in a situation where the teacher is no longer Mr. I know all. Carl Rogers' learning principles. Remember, the first one was on education. The second one was on the learning principles, which is based on the child-centered education. He came up with, again, several principles to guide the instructions. Number 1, human beings have natural desire to learn. You may observe this when, for example, you put a child in an unfamiliar environment. You may be amazed by observing the curiosity and the eagerness which they explore their environment. Number 2, learning is meaningful or significant when it is perceived by learners as relevant to their own needs and purposes. That is when learning will take place. Number 3, learning is most significant and persuasive and pervasive when it is self-initiated and when it involves the learner's feelings and even mind. And the 4, learning should also involve all aspects of the person. That is, the physically, the cognitively, as well as effectively. This is what Rogers called whole. And another religious writer, a renowned writer, writes by saying that we need, now like never before, we need to understand the science of true education, for if we don't, then lest we miss a place in the kingdom of God. And then she writes by saying that, a harmonious education is not just education that is looking forward to empower our learners cognitively, but it's an education that is holistic that will empower them harmoniously in their physical, in their mental, and in their spiritual aptitudes. So what are the implications of Carl Rogers' being? He says, we need to provide unconditional positive regard to the learners. Unconditional positive regard to the learners. As teachers, number two, we need to show empathy. We also need to be genuine to these learners. We also need to provide these learners with a variety of resources that can support and guide their learning experiences. We can also use peer tutoring, where learners who are good in a specific area of learning can help in teaching others. And we also can make classroom learner friendly. Information processing or cognitive theories. The fourth one. So information processing is described as the encoding or registering, storage, and future retrieval of the information from the mind. And we are having the processes that are involved in the information processing. Number one, we have the receiving the information. Number two, the initial processing. Number three, the storage. And number four, the retrieval during the future use. So what are the components of information processing? Number one, we have the sensory register. Then we have the short-term memory, and then we have the long-term memory. And we also have the application of the information processing, where you have just noted, where you should note that the strategy used to storing the learned information may affect its retrieval. If it was just done for the sake, the retrieval will be also zero. There is a need to help learners to develop, planful memory strategies that will help them retrieve the stored information. And these strategies could include rehearsal, where you create opportunities for them to try to interact and rehearse. Organization, where how they organize themselves now determine how the information is stored and how it will be retrieved. Number three, you being meaningful, where this now involves creating meaningful links to what is being learned so that it makes sense to the learners. And you may do this by helping the learners to link the new item with what they have already learned. And this is why we always talk about teaching from known to unknown. Finally, we are looking at module number 11 on the theoretical models explaining emotional and behavioral difficulties and the application of the theories in the management of educational, emotional and behavioral difficulties. So we are looking at module number 11, and in this case, we are going to begin looking at the theories that explain the nature and causes of EBD, and the first one we are going to look at is biological theory. So in the causes and the nature of emotional and behavioral difficulties, we are looking at we are going to look at 7 theorists or theories. Number one is biological theory by Sigmund Freud. And number 2, we are going to look at the psychodynamic theory. And then we are also going to look at behavioral theory, Ivan Pavlov, B.F. Skinner, Albert Bandura, as we have seen up there. We have cognitive behavioral theory, humanistic theory, ecosystem theory, and sociological theory. Now, because we have looked at the majority of these theories in some of the theories up there, in some of the modules up there, we are not going to look at them into details. So what are the theoretical models that try to explain the behavioral difficulties? So we begin looking at the so-called behavioral theory. And this behavioral theory, it tries to draw insights from research in genetics and biological makeups that it seeks to utilize the understanding of the ways in which individuals biologically functioning may be caused by EBD. So the phenomenon of AD, that is attention deficit hyperactivity, ADHD, that is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is an example of problems which may fall under the umbrella of EBD and are believed to a biological base. And this theory highlights potential risk factors that can be averted by intervention. And these are including, one, we are talking about the genetic factors. We are talking about the chromosomal imbalances. We talk about the biochemical imbalances. And finally, we have what we refer to as this the nutritional factors. Now, let's look at the psychodynamic theory. Now, in the psychodynamic theory, again, this is work of Sigmund Freud. This is the work of Sigmund Freud, who attributed behavior to the unchanged childhood in a world. Remember, we have been talking about the same. Unchanged childhood in a world, or unsatisfied childhood emotions and feelings and thoughts that now results in a failure to adapt to the environment. The source of maladaptive behavior is the unresolved emotional conflicts and unsatisfied emotional needs during the early years of development. And according to the psychodynamic theory, these unresolved problems may lead to conflict in later years of human development. For instance, you know, the absence of a mother to a girl or a father to a boy may result in severe instability in later relationships with sex peers. It is very true. Let's look at behavioral theory. I may not explain much there. This theory originated from the thinking of Ivan Pavlov, of course, the classical conditioning through the learning, learning through association. You remember up there we talked about the bell, the caretaker, the dogs, the food powder. The caretaker was eliminated. The bell associated with the food powder, where Pavlov will ring the bell and present the meat. Eventually, the meat was eliminated, and when he rings the bell, the dog still salivate, even in the absence of food. B.F. Skinner, operant conditioning, learning through reinforcement of reward and extinction. Remember the rat, the Skinner with the rat, where the rat will now push a bar, and when he presses the bar, the food will drop down as a reward. We talk about Albert Bandura's social learning through observation and imitation, where he talks about role modeling as an important key in the life of the children. It is also based on the principle, behavioral theory is also based on the principle that there are events in the environment which reinforces behavior, whether desirable or undesirable. And that behavior is learned and it can be unlearned. Therefore, it is possible to change the behavior by manipulating the consequences or events in the environment which reinforce behavior. We also talked about the punishment aspect, where the bad behavior has to meet a reprimand for it to be done what? For it to be changed. And the positive behavior is rewarded. So one behavioral theory, again, that has been directly applied in this case under the behavioral difficulties is the theory of differentiational association. Sorry for that. So one behavioral theory that has been directly applied to understand behavioral difficulties in the theory of differential association. And this theory states that a child may develop behavior disorders, especially delinquency, and we know delinquency, criminal activities among children, when he or she associates with persons who define such behaviors as desirable. And this is why I was talking about the role modeling. If it is poor, we are going to have a society that is not a society. Behavioristics, according to behavioristic standpoint, they lay an emphasis on those behaviors that are observable, measurable, determined by the person's environment, and it is based on the principles of reinforcement and punishment. Cognitive behavioral theory, remember, emotional and behavioral difficulties are seen as a result of maladaptation in relation to perception, attitudes, images, attributed to personal expectations and beliefs. The EBD results from children's thoughts of self in relation to the world around them. It is seen in an ABC model where A is the activating event, B is the belief, which is cognitive process, and C is the consequences, which are problem behaviors. So the children again are helped to develop more rational ways of thinking about themselves through strategies like rational emotive therapy. And this is again a therapeutic procedure based on the idea that illogical thought patterns or lack of information are the basic causes of one's difficulties. Through rational emotive therapy, children with EBD expand their ability to see new connections and inner relations between different things. As we near towards the end, let's talk about the humanistic theory, which lays an emphasis on the individual as responsible for his or her own behavior, and the behavior is described in terms of importance to the individual, and the person is helped to realize the concept. We talk about the ecosystem theory, which is the work of a scholar, American scholar and a practitioner, which is says that the system, this practitioner was known as von Bettelafny, of course, who wrote this in 1950, between 1950 and 1968. And this approach focuses on EBD as being as a result of interaction between the learner and the systems around him, or around him or her, like school, home, and relationships with other people. And the social systems and subsystems contribute to a chain of interactions that produce negative or positive behaviors. And a change in part of the system can result in a change throughout the learner's ecosystem, and thus the behavior difficulties. For example, a big difference between value upheld at school and home may cause behavior difficulties since the systems are inconsistent. Where they're at home, at school, they are told not to eat with the food, or, they are not supposed to talk with the food in the mouth. And at home, they are not discouraged doing the same. They can talk with the mouth full of food, and it seems there is no problem. We also, this approach recognizes the value of behavioral analysis with the emphasis of importance of interpersonal relationships associated with the humanistic psychology. Then sociological theory, remember that it's now a theory that tries to explain behavioral difficulties that result from social interaction with parents, siblings, peers, and other partners. And this theory again places importance on the standards and the norms set within a group, a family, or a society in general. The norms, the ethics that govern the coexistence within a given environment. Now, what are the applications of these theories of management of emotional and behavioral difficulties? One, when we talk about the principles of management, the principles of behavior management are: one, behavior is controlled by its consequences. And I will not explain this further. Two, behavior is strengthened or maintained by reinforcement. Behavior is weakened. Number three, behavior is weakened by withholding the consequences that have maintained it. Number four, behavior is weakened by punishment. And number five, consequences must consistently and immediately follow the behavior they are meant to control. And finally, behavior is strengthened and weakened or maintained by modeling. What are the steps in managing the EBD? One, the step one, identification of the problem. Identify the problem. And after you have identified the problem, select a target behavior. Collecting, after you have selected the target behavior that you want to deal with, collect and record the baseline data. Number four, selection of intervention strategies. Number five, implementation of the intervention plan. And finally, evaluation and follow-up. We also have the behavior modification strategies that can be used in the educational programs to help children, including those with the special needs. One, reinforcement, where the consequences of a particular behavior that increases the future rate of occurrence of that behavior must be met. The token economy, where you are going to exchange non-social conditions such as points, stars, smiling faces, check marks that are run for exhibiting the good behavior. Response course, where a learner loses reinforcers after showing undesirable behavior. You are given a star during the response course. You have now showed a negative behavior, the star is picked back. That is the response cost. Extinction, where you deliberately ignore a certain behavior for it to disappear. Then there is the modeling, demonstrate the desired behavior. There is overcorrection, restoring up to more than normal condition. Every time we talk about it. Timeout, removing the learner from positive reinforcement. This involves minimizing the chances of a learner to obtain reinforcement for a period of time, for 2 to 3 minutes following the unacceptable behavior. Then, especially maybe when they are playing, you tell the learner, no, 3 minutes out of the game. Then we have the physical aversive procedures, where you are going to use a passive aversive procedure, maybe the cane. Then we also have the Primark principle, the grandmother's rule, where one activity is done at a time. Satiation and negative practice, where the elimination of unacceptable behavior as a result of continued increased reinforcement of the behavior. And then we also talk about systematic decentralization, gradually lessening the specific or learned fear or phobia. And then there's punishment. Finally, the strategies for managing emotional and behaviors during the lesson. One, planned ignoring. You ignore a given behavior completely within the class. Signal interference, where now you signal a child, you can use the eye, you can use your finger. Proximity control, moving close to the learner will benefit from supportive closeness. Touch control, gently touching the learner to reduce, to redirect or calm him or her. Tension reduction through humor, creating some jokes within the lesson that will make them to keep concentrating. Helping, where you now a technique you apply to assist a learner who is experiencing difficulty with a specific task, and then you regroup, changing the classroom seating arrangement. Antiseptic bouncing, which is a manipulative removal of a learner from the group to help him or her calm down. And finally, physical restraint, using some degree of forces necessary to prevent a learner from harming self or others or property. That means we have come to the end of our presentation on theories of learning, and I want to say thank you for being there even during this time. God bless us even as we now exit.
Waisraeli walimogopa, akitukana jina lake Bwana. Waisraeli walimogopa, ogopa dhambi ndugu ikikuduma, inaua. Tunapoweka kwa Yesu, shujaa asiyeshindwa. Ogopa dhambi ndugu ikimbia, inaua, inaua. Tunapoweka kwa Yesu, shujaa asiyeshindwa.
Thank you, our Lord, for this far you brought us. As we come to an end of our presentation, we ask of thee, give us another opportunity, another time to continue with this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless us all.